Alright, Saturday. I want to talk a bit more about tech diversity on the front end, and also how teams can be both independent and how they can collaborate if they want to share something between them. So in my model, how I think about things is that we have, for example, 3 different teams that are as much end-to-end as possible, so that we favor them being as autonomous as possible. And this is basically, as I understand it, how Spotify tries to do things. And so in a very large system, you can basically never have this because it's growing organically and you're building stuff on top of things. And that's for companies that have existed in decades or so. That's probably the reality. And also for very young companies, organizations that like startups, they probably don't use these techniques at all, or should use it because they have a very different reality in this different context. They just want to survive, basically, improve their ID. But like in the between, having multiple teams doing autonomous things seems like a good way to deliver value, that they can be independent from each other. So, and that's that model, like end-to-end delivery as much as possible. So if we zoom in, like for example, if we have one team that has one type of component and another team that has another type of component, like how can these teams collaborate and using their components of each other without having the same technology, having requirement on that they use the same technology? Because if that's the requirement, then if you go to this picture again, you see that you have this transitive relationship between technologies. So if this requires that you use only one technology, this kind of collaboration, then it will kind of affect the whole architecture. Like companies that have existed for like say 10 or more years, that have experienced major rewrites both in the back end and the front end, hopefully now have the experience that rewrites are something that you want to avoid and not do in these cycles. And as I said before, I think on the front end, these cycles are being much more common, and we need to find a way out of that, in my opinion. So I would propose that what's going on in this large system, in this like on a page or a set of pages that belong to a certain team, that should be more or less their own choice. So, and it should be quite independent from that. That doesn't mean that they can do exactly or should do exactly what comes into their mind, because we have all these other perspectives. Like it makes sense to have to not have 20 languages or 20 platforms, but also not to have a requirement that you should have only one, because that will eventually break if you have a long-lived organization or system. So something in between, But I would say that even if you only have one language or platform right now, having it is as a requirement to in your architecture in order to do collaboration, that's a bad idea, in my opinion, because then in the future it will be very hard to change that, because you weren't set up for this like platform independent or language independent collaboration in the first place. So basically in here you should be able to do basically what you want under the constraints of your team and your organization. So that makes us focus here on like the connections between some system, like a set of web pages, and how they use this component here. And basically, if you integrate with transclusion, that is bringing the content of the HTML here directly into the page here, using either server-side transclusion or client-side transclusion. In my mind, in my experience, that's the small amount of coupling between languages and platforms that you get while still being on the web. All right. So that means not bringing in a specific language or platform, like having like React or Angular or Ember components here, because you can't really say anything about and if this team is producing these components, they can't really assume that this team is using the same language or platform. So of course there's a like grayscale how if you have like 100% server-side rendered content, or if you just have like a web component. And yeah, that depends a lot as well. And that's nothing that I really think affects the architecture as a whole. It's more about the style of web development that you do, and how many devices and how broad you want to be, basically, in terms of web development. But that's a different question, I think. The most important thing is that you can't make any assumptions on what the consumer side of the component looks like. So that means that regardless if you send a lot of HTML in the response, or just like a component name and then include JavaScript for that like custom element, it needs to be using vanilla.js, because otherwise you make an assumption that what's going on here. Or if you, with each component type, also have a requirement that you need to import like React or Angular or Ember or what have you, that could be fine for just one import. But if you're doing multiple imports from one page to different teams' components, then you might end up with having multiple frameworks on the same page here. And that an example of this is like the front page of a website that might have many different teams' components on the same page, and at the same time that page is like the most important page of the whole website, like the first page, because that's where most of the users are, and because of that, many teams want to belong, want to be a part of that page. So, just to reiterate, these components here should have no assumptions of what's going on on the consumer side. So, and that will allow you, if you take care of that relationship, that will make you have this property of not have a tightly coupled relationship here in terms of technology. Right. Cool. Thank you so much for listening. Take care till next time. Cheers.